When one lost rifleman survived 72 hours alone until the patrol returned. It sounds like a legend, something told in barracks long after the war ended. But on the freezing morning of December 18, 1944, deep in the snow-choked forests of the Ardennes, one rifleman from the U.S. 28th Infantry Division, the Bloody Bucket, truly did vanish. Lost behind enemy lines, cut off from his platoon, hunted by German patrols sweeping the woods, and armed with little more than his M1 Garand, 6 clips of ammunition, and a will to live. For 3 brutal days, his survival would hinge on instinct, training, and moments of luck that defy belief. This is the forgotten story of Private First Class Daniel Mercer, Company E, 110th Infantry Regiment, caught in the chaos of the German breakthrough at the start of the Battle of the Bulge. To understand how a single rifleman ended up stranded behind enemy lines, we need to step back to the conditions on the eve of the German offensive. By early December 1944, the 28th Infantry Division was exhausted. They had suffered heavy casualties in the Hurtgen Forest, and instead of receiving time to rebuild, they were assigned to hold a long, thin stretch of the line across Luxembourg's villages and forests. On paper, the division covered 25 miles, far too large an area for its depleted numbers. Company E, including Private Mercer, was dug in near the small village of Konstum, facing dense pine forests and rolling valleys cloaked in winter fog. Temperatures hovered near freezing. Snow fell nightly. The wind cut like a knife through unlined gloves. Men huddled in foxholes, scraping frost off their rifles every morning. Morale was worn thin, but they believed the line was quiet. They believed they were in a resting sector. They believed the Germans were finished. They were wrong. December 16, 1944, 0530 hours. The earth shook as 1,600 German artillery pieces erupted along the front. In an instant, the Ardennes exploded with fire. Trees snapped, snow plumes burst skyward. Communications lines were severed across the division. Several forward outposts were destroyed before men even had time to react. Company E braced itself. Mercer, only 19 years old, pressed into the frozen ground as the sky turned orange. He would later recall that the artillery felt like the whole forest was being ripped apart. When the barrage lifted, German infantry surged forward. Units from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division and elements of the 2nd Panzer Division. The 28th Infantry Division was engulfed. Over the next 24 hours, the regiment fought desperately, firing from snow-lined ridges, falling back through forest trails, and trying to regroup under constant pressure. During one chaotic withdrawal on December 17th, Mercer's platoon was ordered to fall back to new defensive positions near the Clairf River. Snowstorms reduced visibility to barely 20 yards. Radio lines crackled with fragmented messages. Company E was scattered in pockets. And somewhere in that chaos, Private Mercer vanished. Not deliberately, not dramatically, just swallowed by the fog of war. He followed what he thought was his squad's trail, snowprints leading downhill into the timber. But a curved ridge, drifting snow, and the terrain's steep ravines led him a kilometer east, straight into ground the Germans were already moving through. By the time he realized the mistake, the forest behind him filled with German voices, and the young rifleman found himself completely alone. Lost, cut off, behind enemy lines.
At first, Mercer believed he could backtrack. He checked his compass. He turned west. But within minutes, the distant thump of panzer engines drifted through the trees. Then, shouted orders in German. Footsteps crunching through snow, branches snapping. Enemy units were sweeping through the forest in small groups, searching for American stragglers. Mercer dropped to the ground, pressing into the snow behind a fallen log. His heart hammered in his chest. For the next 30 minutes, he didn't move. German boots passed less than 20 yards from his position. When they finally disappeared deeper into the trees, Mercer crawled south, using a shallow draw for concealment. His gear: M1 Garand rifle, 48 rounds, a canteen, half-frozen solid, 1 K-ration breakfast unit, bayonet, wool overcoat stiff with frost. No radio, no map, no squad. The forest was a maze. Snow muffled sound. Fog erased landmarks. Fallen pines created dead ends. He moved cautiously, checking every shadow for movement. By 1400 hours, the temperature dropped again. Small flakes drifted down from low gray clouds. Mercer climbed a ridge to try and get his bearings. Instead, he froze in place. Below him, through thin trees, he saw an entire column moving west. German infantry with MG-42 teams, followed by armored personnel carriers and supply sleds pulled by horses. He counted roughly 150 men, far too many to slip past. Worse, the column was moving in the direction he needed to go. He waited until they were gone, then headed downslope, only to stop short at the sound of singing. German soldiers, perhaps 30 of them, warming themselves around a truck's engine, laughing and talking. There was no way around. The forest was swarming. By dusk, Mercer realized the truth. He couldn't go west. He couldn't go north. And going south would take him deeper into enemy territory. He needed to hide. He found a shallow depression at the base of a pine tree, swept it clear with his gloves, and lay down, pulling his coat tight around himself. He shivered violently for nearly an hour. The cold seeped into his bones. His boots stiffened. He had survived day 1, but he would face 2 more. At dawn the next morning, Mercer woke to voices. 2 German soldiers patrolling along a small trail 40 yards away. He stayed motionless until they disappeared. His stomach growled. He ate a few bites of compressed oatmeal from his K-ration and forced himself to stop. He needed to stretch 1 meal over 3 days. He drank a small amount of icy water from his canteen. Then he began moving north again, sticking to natural cover. But by 0930 hours, he heard engines. He crept up a small hill and saw them. 2 Panzer IVs and several half-tracks grinding through the snow on a forest road. They were heading toward the front line, toward his division. He crouched behind a spruce tree and watched, helpless. The German offensive was far larger than anyone in Company E had predicted. 9:45. At midday, Mercer made the decision to find an American patrol. Anywhere, any unit. He pushed west again, moving valley to valley. At 1400 hours, he heard gunfire, 2 short bursts of an M1. He sprinted toward it, desperate, stumbling through drifts. But what he found stopped him dead. In a shallow ravine, 3 American soldiers lay dead, likely from Company B, judging by their shoulder patches. Their bodies were still warm. German boot prints surrounded them. Mercer crouched beside one of them, a sergeant, and whispered, "I'm sorry," before quietly retrieving 2 clips of ammunition and a canteen. Then he heard it. A whistle. Short, sharp, close. A German patrol. He dove behind a tree as 4 Volksgrenadiers moved along the ravine, scanning the snow. One stopped and bent over the bodies. The others checked tracks, pointing toward the west, and then turning east. They were following footprints. Mercer's footprints. Cold fear punched through him. He crawled backward, staying low, until he reached a thicket. Then he turned and ran. Branches whipped his face. Snow clung to his coat. He gasped for breath in the freezing air. Behind him, German voices shouted. He ran downslope, slipped, and tumbled into a shallow drainage ditch. Heart pounding, he pressed his face into the snow. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. A German soldier stood at the lip of the ditch. So close, Mercer could see the stitching on his field coat. The soldier raised his rifle, scanning. Seconds crawled by. Then, another soldier called out. The first turned away.
The footsteps faded. Mercer didn't move for 5 full minutes. He had survived again. Day 3, December 19th. By the third morning, exhaustion hit like a hammer. Mercer's legs shook constantly. His fingers burned with cold. His lips cracked. He had slept only in short bursts, between shivers and the fear of being discovered. At dawn, he forced himself to keep moving. His goal was simple: reach the Clerf River, cross it, find any American position still holding. But the forest was alive with German activity. Small patrols, supply units, stragglers, all moving through the same maze of trees. By 1100 hours, Mercer spotted a farmhouse in the distance. Smoke curled from its chimney. Carefully, he circled around and watched. A German medic truck was parked outside. He counted 8 soldiers inside and around the building. He quietly backed away. As he climbed a frozen slope, the distant rumble of artillery grew louder. American artillery. It was the first hopeful sound he had heard in 48 hours. He adjusted his direction and pushed west again, but an hour later, his hope nearly got him killed. He stepped into a small clearing, only to spot a German machine gun team setting up an MG-42 not 60 yards away. One soldier saw movement. "Halt!" A burst of machine gun fire shredded the branches behind him. Mercer dove into the snow, rolled, and scrambled for cover. Bullets snapped over his head. He crawled behind a boulder and fired 2 shots toward the muzzle flash. The German gunner stopped firing, startled by the unexpected return fire. Mercer used the moment to crawl into a narrow gully and vanish. Panting hard, he whispered to himself, "Just keep moving. Just keep moving." By late afternoon on December 19th, Mercer had been alone for nearly 60 hours. And now he faced the moment when everything seemed lost. Snow began falling heavily again, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The forest darkened, even though it was still early evening. Mercer climbed a ridge to try to get oriented, but what he saw below chilled him. A full German company, roughly 120 men, moving in staggered formation through the trees. He crouched low. Then he heard more movement to his left. Another group, possibly 40 men. They were converging on him. A pincer movement, entirely unintentional, but deadly all the same. He backed away slowly. 1 step, then another. A branch snapped under his boot. "Halt! Wer ist da?" Shouts, flashlights, boots pounding. Mercer ran. He zigzagged through the trees, slipping on ice, gasping for breath, stumbling through knee-deep snow. Rifles cracked behind him. Bullets hissed past. A tree trunk splintered inches from his shoulder. He reached a steep embankment, nearly vertical and covered in ice. He had no choice. He slid down, smashing through underbrush.
Snow filled his collar. Sharp branches tore at his coat. He landed hard at the bottom, knocking the wind out of him. He rolled behind a fallen pine and lay still. German soldiers gathered at the ridge above. Flashlights swept the slope. One man fired a burst down into the brush. Snow exploded all around Mercer. He pressed into the ground, trying to make himself invisible. Minutes ticked by. Then, silence. The Germans moved east. They had lost him in the darkness. He was alive, but barely. The worst night. As night fell on December 19th, the temperature dropped below -10 degrees Celsius. Mercer's coat was soaked from his fall. His hands shook uncontrollably. Frost formed on his eyelashes. Hypothermia set in. He staggered until he reached a small culvert under an old road, barely 3 feet high, half filled with snow. But it was shelter. He crawled inside, curled into a ball, and shivered violently. He whispered to himself to stay awake. He thought about his squad, his brother back home, the warm kitchen he grew up in. He forced himself to eat the last of his K-ration. Then he focused on one goal: survive until dawn. At dawn on December 20th, Mercer could barely stand.
But he heard something. Distant, faint, steady. A hum. Then, voices. American voices. He climbed slowly up the road embankment. At the top, he saw them. A U.S. patrol, 6 men from the 109th Infantry Regiment, moving cautiously along the edge of the forest. Mercer waved weakly. One of the soldiers shouted, "Jesus Christ, don't shoot! It's one of ours!" 2 men rushed to him, lifting him under the arms. They wrapped him in a blanket and poured lukewarm coffee from a canteen cup. He whispered through cracked lips, "Thought I was the only one left." What happened next would stay with him forever. The patrol leader, Staff Sergeant Collins, stared at Mercer's frost-bitten hands, his torn coat, the snow frozen into his hair. "You've been out here a while," Collins said quietly. 3 days, Mercer whispered. "Enemy. Everywhere." Collins shook his head in disbelief. "Then you're one tough bastard. Let's get you home." The fight back to friendly lines. The patrol began escorting Mercer west toward a defensive position near Wiltz. But the Germans were still pressing the offensive. By 10:30 hours, the group reached a narrow valley and walked straight into a German reconnaissance team of 8 men. Both sides froze. Then the firefight erupted. An MG-42 burst pinned the Americans behind trees. Snow kicked up around them. Splinters flew. Collins shouted, "Mercer, rifle!" Despite his shaking hands, Mercer braced his M1 on a tree trunk and fired. His shot struck a German soldier's center mass. The patrol poured fire into the ravine, forcing the remaining Germans to retreat. It was over in less than a minute. Collins clapped Mercer on the shoulder. "Hell of a shot for someone who's half frozen." They moved again. By early afternoon, American artillery thundered overhead, the first sign Mercer truly was close to safety. Finally, at 1400 hours, they reached a cluster of defensive foxholes manned by the 109th. A medic rushed forward. "Jesus, he's frostbitten. Get him to the aid station." Mercer collapsed onto a stretcher. As they carried him away, he whispered, "I made it. I made it back." He had survived the impossible. Private First Class Daniel Mercer spent the next 2 weeks recovering in a makeshift field hospital near Bastogne. Doctors treated him for severe frostbite, dehydration, exhaustion, mild trench foot, shrapnel cuts he didn't even remember receiving. When he was strong enough to speak clearly, an officer interviewed him. His account helped American commanders understand the scale of German troop movements in the northern sector, information that proved valuable as U.S. forces organized counterattacks. For surviving 72 hours behind enemy lines, for evading multiple patrols, for refusing to surrender his weapon, and for assisting the patrol in a firefight despite his physical state, PFC Daniel Mercer was awarded the Bronze Star. His squad later joked that even the forest couldn't kill him. But the truth was simpler. He kept moving. He made smart choices. He refused to give up, and luck, just enough of it, stayed by his side. When the war ended, Mercer returned home to Ohio, where he lived a quiet life, working as a mechanic and raising 3 children. He rarely spoke about the war, but on cold winter mornings, when frost lined the windows, he would fall silent, remembering those 3 days in the Ardennes when the world seemed determined to swallow him whole. His story never made it into official histories. It lived only in the memories of the men who found him, and now in yours.